If you're looking for the next big thing in the UFC, I've got you covered with the best young fighters and top prospects fighting this month. My criteria is simple. Fighters are eligible for prospect status if they're outside the top 10 in their respective divisions and have no UFC main event experience. Okay, let's get started. First on the list, Joshua Van, a flyweight from Myanmar fighting out of Texas. Van has taken the UFC by storm with 3 consecutive wins to cement himself at 10-1 and may be considered one of the best prospects in the UFC's flyweight division. He's only 22 years old, which ranks him as the 5th youngest fighter on the UFC roster, and Van's journey to the UFC and really to the sport of MMA in general was anything but conventional. He didn't come from a traditional martial arts background. In fact, he fell in love with combat sports after years of street fighting as a kid and then decided he wanted to make fighting his full-time job. Van combines this game street fighting style with technical boxing skills, and he also possesses elite cardio from his soccer background. Looking at Van's strengths, his boxing skills, like I mentioned, really stand out, and notably he has really sharp jabs and loves to dig the body either from range or in the pocket. Second, his cardio is ridiculous. Van has put on an incredible pace in all 3 of his UFC fights. And third, connecting to both his boxing and cardio, Van is always putting on the pressure and pacing out his opponents with tons of volume. Now, we saw this volume in his UFC debut where he landed 120 significant strikes in his win over Double Z Zagazumagulov. He then landed 156 in his second UFC fight, another win, this time over Kevin Borjas. And in his third UFC fight, he landed 83 significant strikes in less than 2 rounds before earning the second round TKO over Felipe Buenas. That puts Van at 359 significant strikes landed through 3 UFC fights. Pretty impressive. Van had the jab working all night long versus Double Z, hurting him on multiple occasions. His body work was off the charts versus Borjas, with left and right hooks and the straight right landing to the body every time he threw it. He also showed off his well-rounded game with takedowns at ease against Borjas. And this past January, he showed off his finishing instincts with tons of pressure, hard knees, ground and pound, and really just cardio killed Felipe Buenas. Before the UFC, Van was Fury FC's flyweight champion, going 7-1 with all 7 wins by finish, 5 knockouts and 2 submissions, and one of those submissions was actually a calf slicer, which is super rare, and we haven't seen a calf slicer in the UFC for years, so that's pretty cool. Literally an hour before recording this, his fight on April 6th was canceled because of his opponent getting injured, so that sucks, but Van is super active, so I think he'll get rescheduled for April, and I didn't want to not include him on this video just because I think Joshua Van is really special. So if you're looking for a young and skilled flyweight prospect, Joshua Van is that guy. Expect him to have a very entertaining and active 2024. Up next, Jean Matsumoto, a bantamweight from Brazil. If you like technical striking and Muay Thai, this is your guy. At 14-0 and only 24 years old, Matsumoto is coming off a stellar performance on Dana White's Contender Series. The Brazilian showed off his damaging kicking game against fellow top prospect Casey Tanner, who was highly touted at a Fight Ready in Arizona, where he trains with Henry Cejudo. Matsumoto looked much more comfortable and composed on the feet compared to Tanner, and you can credit this to Matsumoto's extensive experience in Muay Thai, having trained the art since he was only 6 years old. Matsumoto opened up with his hands after establishing his damaging low kicks in the very first round, and he'd go on to win an impressive unanimous decision, and even had Dana White up on his feet and even enter the octagon once the fight concluded, to congratulate both Matsumoto and Tanner for the banger of the fight. Now, looking at Matsumoto's strengths, his Muay Thai fundamentals are really solid. He throw a stiff jab, then explode into a hard low kick, or a 3-2-3 combo into a hard low kick, and his technique is really sharp. He doesn't overextend, he's compact, and defensively he's very sound. He shells up in the traditional Muay Thai high guard, which yes, limits his head movement off the center line, but allows him to counter with hooks and stay dangerous at all times. Last thing, his maturity is very impressive for a 24-year-old. He's composed and clearly has his emotions and drive in check. Before the Contender Series, Matsumoto was the SFT Bantamweight and Flyweight Champion, which is a Brazilian promotion based in Sao Paulo. Also, I don't know how he made 125. He's very well built, so glad he's at 135 now. Definitely a healthier option for him. Anyway, Matsumoto impressed in SFT by hurting his opponents with head kicks and overall being a serious threat on the feet. Another thing I like about Matsumoto is his record. He hasn't fought absolute bums like most prospects, and if we look at his previous 6 opponents, they've all had great records. Most of them have been good prospects in their own rights, which is not something you can say for most prospects entering the UFC. Matsumoto does have weaknesses though, as he has been controlled and taken down by opponents in the past, including on the Contender Series versus Tanner. If Matsumoto can, however, improve his grappling and takedown defense and keep fights standing, he'll be a handful on the feet for anyone. Matsumoto makes his UFC debut this coming Saturday versus Dan Argueta, a UFC veteran who I'd assume will test out Matsumoto's grappling and make for a fun fight. Again, if you like Muay Thai and a technically sound striker, Brazilian bantamweight Jean Matsumoto is your guy. Next up, Diego Lopes, a featherweight from Brazil fighting out of Mexico. Now, most of you probably know who Diego Lopes is, a rising fan favorite at featherweight for his dangerous fighting style and his crazy hair. Now, why should you be excited about Diego Lopes? Well, first and foremost, he's a finisher. With a record of 23-6, he's finished 21 of those 23 wins, 9 wins by knockout, 12 by submission, and 2 by decision, equaling an impressive 91% finish rate. On the ground, Diego fights like a young Charles Oliveira, constantly chaining together submission attacks regardless of the position, always looking to finish the fight from start to finish. We witnessed this on the biggest and brightest stage at MSG at UFC 288 against the undefeated Movsar Evloev. Diego took the fight on just 5 days' notice, and to everyone's surprise except himself, he had Movsar caught badly in 3 separate submission attacks. He caught him with a brutal armbar in the first round that Movsar was somehow able to escape. In the third, he threatened a Kimura, which had Movsar in deep trouble. And in the dying seconds of the fight, Diego had him in a chaotic leg lock that Evloev waited out until time expired. Diego ended up losing that fight, but gained massive amounts of respect and fandom for his gutsy performance. Also worth mentioning, Diego isn't just a dangerous submission threat. He's no joke on the feet with long-range boxing attacks, natural power, and a willingness to trade shots. Like his submission attack, we also saw his striking play out well against Movsar as he stunned him in the opening seconds of the fight with a long right cross and a short right. After the Movsar fight, Lopes was matched up against Canada's Gavin Tucker. Diego showed off his incredibly dangerous jiu-jitsu in a literal minute as he jumped guard on Tucker and immediately worked in a triangle, which he then switched to the triangle armbar and submitted Tucker seconds later, proving his UFC debut was not just a fluke, but that Diego Lopes was the real deal. In his next UFC fight, returning to MSG, this time at UFC 295, the Yuri Prochazka and Alex Pereira card, Diego took on talented grappler Pat Sabatini, and again, in just 1 minute, Diego clipped him with a short right hook, wobbling him backwards, and then finished him with hard ground and pound to send New York into a frenzy. This was the moment we all realized Diego Lopes was truly who we thought he was and who we'd hoped he was. Now let's take a look at Diego's game. His strengths are highlighted by his jiu-jitsu and his attacks from guard and bottom, as I've mentioned, his solid boxing attack with his frame, natural power, and willingness to strike, and finally his mentality, his fighting spirit. Training out of Mexico and coming from the Amazonas of Brazil, Diego is fighting for his family, his legacy, and for his future, and he carries his passion with him in the octagon. Before the UFC, Diego Lopes was the Lux Fight League featherweight champion. He went 6-0 in Lux with 4 finishes, 3 of which by submission, 2 armbars, and a knee bar, and he also showed capable striking skills in Lux as well. Lopes faces his biggest test so far at UFC 300 against Nigeria's Super Sadiq Yusuf, who's coming off that Fight of the Year contender versus Edson Barbosa last October. Diego currently sits as a decent favorite against Sadiq, but I expect this to be a very close fight and a really good fight at that. Keep an eye on Diego Lopes. This dude has a chance to be not only a massive fan favorite, but a highly entertaining contender in the very near future. Up next, Bo Nickal, a middleweight out of Happy Valley, Pennsylvania. Now, we all know how great of a wrestler Bo Nickal is, arguably one of the greatest wrestlers to ever transition into MMA, and he'll likely only be considered a prospect for 1 to 2 more fights, and then he'll hopefully fight a ranked contender at middleweight and get himself into the top 15. What we've seen so far from Bo Nickal has been impressive, but as expected. He's taken care of business immediately in both of his Contender Series fights, earning quick first-round submissions. In his UFC debut, he took on Jamie Pickett and figured out how to land the head and arm triangle for about 3 minutes before Pickett basically tapped out of annoyance. And then most impressively, he knocked out Val Woodburn in less than a minute, showing clear signs of improvement in his striking and evident natural power in his hands. Let's take a look at Bo's strengths. Like I just mentioned, his wrestling is elite and maybe the best in the middleweight division. I think a fight with Hamza would be really great. Second, he clearly has power in his hands. We saw this on the Contender Series with the overhand left versus Donovan Beard, and most recently versus Val Woodburn. Finally, his mindset. Bo has been a competitive athlete since he was basically 6 years old, and he's always focused on discipline, improving his craft, and just being a winner. Now, both of his Contender Series opponents weren't great, and his UFC opponents, let's be honest, Val Woodburn and Jamie Pickett are the literal bottom of the barrel in the UFC. But Bo did what he was supposed to do, and he finished them all in the first round. Bo will now take on Cody Brundage at UFC 300, surprisingly on the main card. Brundage is technically a step up in competition, but he's also not a quality UFC middleweight. Sorry, Cody. We obviously expect Bo to win this fight, but I think a first round finish would go a long way. Next up, Mateusz Rąbecki, a lightweight from Poland. Now this dude is an absolute beast and he's built like a brick shithouse. At 19-1, Mateusz is a very well-rounded lightweight with 9 wins by KO and 7 by submission. He's 3-0 in the UFC with a KO, submission, and decision win, further highlighting his depth of skills, and he's currently on a ridiculous 16-fight win streak. Before the UFC, Rąbecki was the FEN lightweight champion, and he defended the belt a staggering 6 times. He's also a 2-time Polish ADCC champ and a 3-time European BJJ champ. And a fun fact about Rąbecki, before he started training, he was actually a bodyguard. And why does that matter? Well, the dude is built, right? But he's only 5'7" with a 66-inch reach, so it's funny just picturing him as a bodyguard. And if we compare him to his upcoming opponent, Joel Alvarez, who we'll talk about later, the size discrepancy is wild. 5'7" with a 66-inch reach compared to 6'3" with a 77-inch reach. That's like a featherweight fighting a light heavyweight just in height and reach. Anyway, Rąbecki, other than being short, the dude is an absolute weapon. If we look at his strengths, Rąbecki is a really good wrestler, solid takedowns, good control, hard ground and pound. He's got multiple knockouts from elbows from crucifix on the regional scene in Europe, and a really good armbar. On the feet, he's a capable and confident striker with legit power in both his hands and his kicks. And last thing, the dude is just a proven winner. He knows how to fight, he knows where to take the fight, and he targets his opponent's weaknesses and capitalizes on them. This past November at UFC 295, he armbarred Roosevelt Roberts in the very first round. Before that, he knocked out Loik Radzhabov in the second round after completely brutalizing Loik's legs for 7 minutes. And in his UFC debut, he had a dominant decision win over Nick Fior, where he showed off both strong grappling and striking skills. Mateusz takes on El Fenomeno Joel Alvarez at the end of the month, a fight I expect him to win. His low center of gravity should allow him to take down Joel at will and finish him with either hard ground and pound or work his way towards a submission. Rąbecki is someone you should definitely keep an eye on, a talented prospect and a future top contender in the UFC's lightweight division. Next up, Karine Killer Silva, a women's flyweight from Curitiba, Brazil. Now, women's MMA can be very boring, as we know, but Karine Killer Silva is the opposite of boring. Like her nickname dictates, she is an absolute killer with a 100% finish rate. At 17-4, she has 8 wins by knockout and 9 by submission. She's so far 3-0 in the UFC, with all 3 wins coming by submission. She has nasty jiu-jitsu, highlighted by her knee bar and armbar attacks. If you don't tap, she will snap your arm, or your leg, or your knee, whatever it may be. And we've already seen this on full display in the UFC Octagon. Karine is also a trailblazer in women's MMA, having fought a dude on Dana White's Contender Series in China's QQE Yan, I butchered that name, and you can't tell me that's not a guy. Karine submitted Yan in the second round with her death squeeze of a guillotine to earn the UFC contract. And if we take a look at Karine's strengths, her offensive jiu-jitsu really stands out. She's a real submission threat at all times on the ground. Her boxing is also quite solid. She's landed the left hook repeatedly in the UFC and has good power in both hands. And finally, her ferocious style. Mainly the ferocity we see a lot on the ground and at times on the feet, but overall, Karine is nicknamed the Killer for a reason. She takes on Ariane Lipski at the end of the month in what is definitely the biggest fight of her career and a decent step up in competition. I expect this one to be close, and I believe we'll see a submission victory here for either woman, as Lipski is no joke. So if you're looking for finishers in women's MMA, look out for Karine Killer Silva. Next up, honorable mentions: Morgan Charrière, or in French, Morgan Charrière, a featherweight from France. Charrière comes from Cage Warriors, where he was the promotion's featherweight champ in 2020. Morgan is a creative and dangerous striker with 4 out of his 6 Cage Warriors wins coming by knockout. He throws hard low kicks and body kicks. He's confident with his hands, and we've seen him land a devastating knockout with his knees, reminiscent of old school finishes in Pride. Charrière is also a competent grappler, and he showed off his skills on the ground in Cage Warriors. He's also fresh off an epic UFC debut where he landed a vicious body kick knockout of Manolo Zucchini in the second round. Charrière hurt him bad with the front kick teep to the solar plexus, and then basically dug in a soccer kick volley into Zucchini's body, straight out of Khalil Roundtree's playbook. The knockout took place in Charrière's home country of France, where the crowds always bring the energy and passion. Take a listen to the scenes after Charrière's finish. Charrière also has a great personality, and he joked that he came into the fight hoping to smash his opponent's jaw, in French, casser la gueule. Je lui casse la gueule, c'est tout! Charrière is set to face Chepe Mariscal this Saturday in what should be a very competitive fight. Chepe is an absolute dog, so I expect a good scrap. A skilled featherweight to keep an eye on, France's Morgan Charrière. Next up, Charlie the Cannibal Campbell, a lightweight from New York. Campbell is an athletic knockout artist with deadly power, as we saw in his UFC debut this past November, where he earned the first-round knockout over Alex Reyes. Campbell hurt Reyes bad on multiple occasions and put him down for good with a wicked fast right cross off the missed uppercut and left hook. Campbell is a pleasure to watch on the feet as he puts together 3, 4, and even 5-piece combinations, always hunting for the knockout. Charlie has an explosive uppercut that he looks to land as the kill shot, and we saw him hurt Chris Duncan on the Contender Series with an uppercut multiple times before Duncan actually landed the knockout punch of his own in one of my all-time favorite Contender Series fights. Charlie's also fought on Bellator twice, earning a leg kick knockout and a body shot knockout. One of the main reasons I'm featuring Campbell is because his fluid and dangerous striking style is entertaining to watch, and second, because he's fighting an absolute madman and one of the craziest fighters in the UFC in Trevor Peek this Saturday. I'm guaranteeing a knockout in this fight, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Charlie Campbell can do. Peek has a ridiculous chin, and you mix that with Campbell's striking prowess, but his lack of striking defense and somewhat of a suspect chin, and we've got a chaotic, exciting fight on our hands this weekend. Next up, James Yontop, a lightweight from Peru. This 24-year-old embodies the Latin American fighting spirit. He's got terrific boxing, great cardio up at altitude in Peru, extremely durable, and he puts on a ton of pressure. Yontop comes from FFC, Fusion Fighting Championship, where he was actually their welterweight champ. Having moved down to lightweight, Yontop looked phenomenal in the Contender Series, where he completely beat the brakes off of Malik Lewis to earn the UFC contract. Yontop was in Lewis's face the entire fight, landing boxing combinations to the head and the body, and he hurt him bad with a body kick and also showed off decent grappling skills to solidify rounds. Yontop fights Gabe Green at the end of the month. This is a really good prove-it fight for us to see if Yontop is legit at the UFC level, and for Green, who moves down from welterweight. I fully expect this to be a striker's affair, with both men confident in their stand-up and happy to trade shots. Yontop's pressure and durability might cause problems for Green. I'm expecting either a late TKO or a decision win here for the Peruvian lightweight prospect James Yontop. And finally, Joel El Fenomeno Alvarez, a lightweight from Spain. Now, I've featured lots of good fighters on this list, lots of top prospects, many of whom finished the majority of their fights, and Joel Alvarez is no exception to that list. Joel has a 100% finish rate and a ridiculous number of submissions, with 17 of his 20 wins coming by sub. The Spaniard does love his Muay Thai and his striking acumen, but it's no secret that Alvarez is a submission specialist predominantly off his back, with guillotines, triangles, and arm bars. On the feet, however, Joel is also fun to watch as he absolutely demolished Thiago Moises with elbows and knocked him out in only 3 minutes. For reference, it took the current lightweight champ Islam Makhachev 4 rounds to finish Moises. Having said that, Alvarez has clear flaws in his game and absolutely zero takedown defense. Alvarez won't be a future UFC champion, but I'm featuring him because he's absolutely an entertaining guy to keep an eye on, and his fight with Mateusz should be really exciting if he can keep it on the feet or work his way towards a submission. I fully expect Rambetsky to get the better of Joel, but I won't count him out as the Spaniard has 20 wins, all of which by finish. If you've made it this far, thank you. It takes a lot of time and energy to make these videos. Let me know what you think about the prospects I chose, and consider subscribing, liking, sharing, and all that horseshit, and I'll see you guys on the next video.